Good afternoon to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our Hurricane Tropical Weather Outlook video. Today is May 24th, a Friday. Made it to the end of another week, and now we're on to the weekend. Today, though, being May 24th, 2024, it is also, we're heading into Memorial Day weekend as well. Taking a look at what's going on across the tropics in the Atlantic today, we still have an area of interest in the Atlantic with a 10% chance over the next 2 and next week as well. Next 2 days and next 7 days is at a 10% chance, as I should have said. But you get the idea. A low chance of development in the Atlantic. Not much really expected out of this system, and I'll show you in a moment. And you'll see why not much is expected to develop out of this area that the NHC mentioned, at least as of right now. But in the Eastern Pacific, nothing happening over the next week there, at least as of not yet. Things still remain quiet, and it looks like it'll remain that way over the next week once again. But you can see why, though, the area mentioned by the NHC only has a 10% chance over the next week. It is a very broad area of low pressure. You can see lots of convective activity kind of stretched out, not really concentrating over one specific area. So because that is happening, that is, in result, we are not going to see any development of this system. When we do want to see development, we want to look for an area that is more concentrated in terms of its convective activity. This, you could just kind of see the convection all over the place, and it's really not trying to consolidate over one area. And plus, you could also see a bunch of wind shear over top this as well. So environmentally, conditions are just not favorable for this system to really do much other than remain non-tropical. And I could even show you here in the 850 millibar vorticity 2. This is really one of the instances where we could kind of compare and look in real time for an area of interest, just to kind of get a perspective of how it truly looks structurally. And you could see it structurally in terms of vorticity. It is all stretched out, not concentrated, not like this area down here, which is actually a tropical wave, with the first tropical wave that we talked about yesterday and the day before that. But this is actually more concentrated and defined. Obviously, it won't develop. It's only May. But bottom line, the point I'm trying to make is the energy associated with the system is all stretched out. And once again, environmental conditions really are not favorable for this as well. So nothing is going to happen out of this system. And it looks like, once again, development in the Atlantic is not really a certain in terms of when it'll happen right now, at least over the next week. Taking a look at, though, across the MDR, nothing else of really any note or anything that is all too significant. Starting to see a little more energy come off of Africa and into the Eastern MDR. We're going to start getting more tropical waves to come off. And eventually, as we head later into the season, these waves will begin to actually have a chance to develop and become our seedlings, as I mentioned, for these tropical systems that could form out here in the MDR or not. Sometimes waves tend to wait closer, a little further to the west, and sometimes even those can become monstrous hurricanes in the Western Atlantic, and that's actually happened in multiple cases in the past, some of those cases being very infamous hurricanes that we all know. And obviously why we're not going to get development in the Eastern MDR, it is because of Saharan air. Just look at how much Saharan air we have. A new dust plume actually exiting off of Africa right now, and obviously this is going to keep things kind of lidded up, or it's going to keep things capped up. I probably should have said it in a much better way, but you get what I mean, I'm sure. Things are not favorable atmospherically as well in the MDR right now, plus the ITCZ is very far to the south. It's only May. Once the ITCZ begins to advance further to the north, especially by the time we get to late July and August, this is when things start becoming a lot more favorable for the Eastern Atlantic, and that's when we'll probably get development. Although we might get a chance this year in June, especially given how warm the Atlantic is. But bottom line, lots of Saharan air there out in the Atlantic right now. And obviously, as a result of that, no development occurring. Plus the fact, once again, it is only May. You can actually see quite a bit of dust back through into the Western Atlantic and the Gulf as well. And this is actually common sometimes for these big Saharan air plumes that they kind of make their way off of Africa, and they're able to advance all the way to the west and end up in the Caribbean and the Gulf, besides just the Eastern Caribbean islands, which tend to really sometimes get in on being able to see the effects of the Saharan air outbreaks. Since we're talking about the Gulf, let's talk about sea surface temperatures. They're very warm indeed. In fact, as I mentioned several days ago, very soon the Gulf is going to fill up entirely in terms of being in the threshold, which is around 26 degrees Celsius, as we typically look at for development in the Atlantic. And it basically seems like the Gulf is now completely warm enough basically to sustain tropical development entirely, especially the Western Gulf. Look at this, 28s, stretching up even up to the southern coast of Texas even. We're seeing readings as high as 28 Celsius, which is already stretching it into the mid and upper 80s. And boy, in the Bay of Campeche, it gets really warm too, as much as 30 degrees. And even off of Havana, not Havana, but even off of Cuba, off southern Cuba, and this is, I think, the Isle of Youth, there's as much as 31 there too. And this is probably shelf water, so it's much able to warm up easier. But the bottom line is it's very warm across the entire Gulf and Caribbean. And you can even see this portion. This is roughly 28, 29 Celsius. So once again, mid to upper 80s, stretching up even into the central eastern Gulf. This is associated though with the loop current. You can take a look off of Florida. Very warm there as well. And even up the Gulf Stream off the Carolinas coast, this area has been somewhat cooler throughout the entire winter and spring so far, kind of associated generally with the pattern of the AMO. The subtropics tends to be cooler. But we're still seeing these warmer sea surface temperatures slowly beginning to inch their way off the coast of the Carolinas. Still not right up against the coast. So if you're going down to the Carolinas beaches for Memorial Day weekend, it'll probably may not be as warm as you want it to be. So I guess that's just something that many of us will probably have to deal with, unfortunately, for Memorial Day weekend. But I guess if you want to travel off the Carolinas coast, just a few miles, maybe 50 or so miles off the coast, you'll hit the Gulf Stream, and that's where you'll actually hit temperatures in the 80s or around 26, 27 degrees Celsius along the Gulf Stream. But over the next several weeks, this area will warm up too, and we'll probably see these 26 readings make their way right up against the shelf waters of the Carolinas coast. But since we have such warm sea surface temperatures, and we've been talking about this, we even talked about this yesterday, such warm sea surface temperatures across the Gulf and across the Western Atlantic, it really does raise the kind of idea and the question when it comes to early season development. And a lot of people, especially in the most recent days, have been talking about the potential for early season development to occur in the Atlantic. And this is once again reviewed, or kind of emphasized, I should say, that's the right word, emphasized by Ben Knoll. This is a tweet that he put out yesterday, but I guess it could still be very much valid for today. He mentions a significant convective pulse is poised to propagate into the Atlantic Ocean during the second week of June. That's indicated, and he actually has the graph indicating rising air and sinking air in the atmosphere, and you could see, if only I could actually zoom in on this graph, whatever, you could actually see he's talking about it mid-June. You notice where all this rising air is, and it is in the Western Atlantic and even in the Eastern Pacific too. And this is all right around the mid-June time frame, right at the start of the hurricane season, or just near the start of the hurricane season. And obviously that should lead us to believe, and it kind of continues as well. It actually comes in a little earlier. This is the second week of June. So a little bit earlier on, we have a huge rising air sort of pattern that sets up in the atmosphere over the Atlantic. And once again, this is the second week of June, so right at the heels of the start of hurricane season, the atmosphere becomes more favorable across the Western Atlantic, which is typically where we look at for development this time of year. And we can even take a look at this with the MJO. This is the European. This model was that Ben Knoll was showing was the JMA. This is the European. Goes out to also around the same time frame. It actually goes out to June 7th. And you could see the European kind of lags behind a little bit. Still shows the MJO in the Western Pacific. What we want to see is it being able to propagate all the way to the Western Hemisphere and into the Atlantic, which is roughly phases 8, 1, and 2. Those are the more favorable phases that we look at, especially when it comes to early season development. And the European is not quite there yet, but I'm sure over the next several days, once we start getting more of these runs in, the European will probably start showing the MJO go into Africa. Not just Africa, but in the Western Hemisphere in general, in our side of the world, where we're looking at the potential for development. But as I did mention, as I showed you, very warm sea surface temperatures across the Caribbean, Gulf, and even off the southeast U.S., you got to raise the question, will this this more favorable atmospheric pattern actually pan out, and potentially things could be paved for early season development to occur, and potentially we might as well get our first name Alberto very, very soon in the Atlantic. Seems that is definitely the possibility, as over the next several days things could become more favorable, or I should say over the next several weeks as we head into early June, things could become more favorable over the Atlantic and even Eastern Pacific too. So even them, they might get a chance on getting their first system as well. So things are definitely lining up. We're definitely seeing hurricane season on its way. As I once again said, and I'll continue to mention it, hurricane season is definitely right on our doorstep. We're only a week away from hurricane season now. This time next week, we'll basically already be into the start of the Atlantic hurricane season, and I'm definitely sure by then we'll have a lot more of an idea if this development change that we're looking at will actually become something that is legit. It is actually potential. It is actually a real potential. But once again, just judging by how warm the Atlantic is, wouldn't surprise me in the very least if we do get something to come out of this. With that being said, though, not much else for there to talk about. But obviously, expect another video discussion tomorrow. Probably going to go over our usual ENSO sea surface temperature anomalies in the Atlantic, which continue to be record-breaking right now. But we'll obviously go over it tomorrow. But as of today, nothing else really going on. Atlantic and Pacific remaining quiet, and it does look like it should remain quiet in the near future. Thanks for watching. Stay safe. Peace, love, and kindness to all, and we will talk again tomorrow.